Thursday, June 9, 2011. My name is Joe Monnier of the Southern Oral History Program at the University of North Carolina at Chapel Hill. I'm with videographer John Bishop. We are in Orangeburg, South Carolina to complete an oral history interview for the Civil Rights History Project, which is a joint undertaking of the Smithsonian's National Museum of African American History and Culture and the Library of Congress. And we're delighted today to be with you, Mr. Cecil J Williams. It's an honor and a privilege. Thank you for sitting down with us and welcoming us to your home and studio for this opportunity.
It's my great pleasure as well.
I'm just very much looking forward to the session today. So let me start our conversation with, can you just give a basic description of your childhood and youth and family and early education?
Well, I am the third sibling of Ethel and Cecil L. Williams. My father, who has, of course, and mother have passed away, but he was a self-employed tailor, worked in the city of Orangeburg. My mother, all of her life, was an educator. She worked on the college level as well as the high school and elementary level. And I grew up in Orangeburg. This has been my home, my life home, and I have preferred to remain here in spite of all the negative things and in spite of the fact that this has been really the beginning and still is somewhat of a battleground for my race and trying to overcome all the barriers that arrive out of just trying to make a living and growing up in the segregation that I did grow up in under Jim Crow laws that affected the state of South Carolina. But my mother taught me at a very early age that that mostly people are alike. We're more alike than we are different. And I grew up understanding, and I tried to treat all people of all races all of my life as she did, as fair as I could. And I think that her lessons and my father's lessons, I think, have helped to make me the person that I am today. And but I become aware of what's going on relative to race and civil rights probably around 7 or 8 or 9 years old. As a youth, I remembered boarding. At that time, we had a bus system here in Orangeburg, bus transportation system. And I remember boarding the bus, and my awareness of segregation probably came about as she told me that we had to sit in a certain section of the bus. So we would usually, sometimes it changed. Sometimes it was that we would sit at the back of the bus, and sometimes it was that we would have to sit maybe a certain section in the bus. And it very definitely had a line that marked where we were to sit. It was either within that line, and if the bus was crowded and that where we were to sit was crowded, then we had to stand or not board the bus at all. And so this was probably my very first lesson or experience in race and where we had a place. So largely, I grew up thinking that really Orangeburg, the citizens here, the white citizens, the black citizens, we lived in very parallel societies, a white society and a black society. And there were separate playgrounds, separate schools. If we went to a movie theater, there was a place designated for African Americans. We either sat upstairs or downstairs, and it changed. If we were to go into a store in downtown Orangeburg, we could go into the main store, but if there was a lunch counter, we could not sit down at the lunch counter. Of course, I'm speaking about the period as I became an adult and as I became cognizant of my surroundings, the 50s and, of course, the early 60s. If we were to, say, take a bus from the Orangeburg Greyhound Trailway station. Of course, we would then also have to sit on that particular bus. And so interstate transportation was also segregated. We had a certain place that we would have to sit. The school system that I grew up under from all the days that I was in education was also segregated. I went to the segregated elementary schools, segregated middle schools, and segregated high school. My high school was Wilkinson High School. So this kind of gives you an overview of my growing up in and around Orangeburg.
Sure.
And my family lived on Quick Street. I grew up on an area of Orangeburg that would be about 2 blocks from South Carolina State College. And it was in the shadows of colleges that my entire world, whatever experiences I had, were very greatly influenced by the colleges. And I would say that Orangeburg would be much less a significant place as it turned out to be had it not been for the influence of those colleges, Claflin and South Carolina State College. South Carolina State and Claflin College helped to really fill my experiences of life from the standpoint that they brought in cultural programs and speakers from the outside world, some internationally known, and I feel that helped to round out my experiences from not living in a city of significant size. Orangeburg, a largely agricultural community. We are about midways between Columbia, South Carolina, and Charleston, South Carolina. Columbia being the capital, and Charleston being also a very significant area and a large population as well.
What was the approximate percentage of the local population in the city, in the town, back in the 50s, black and white?
Roughly about 40% African American, yes.
Yeah. And you've mentioned the 2 colleges and how significant those were as institutions in the black community and in the city's life, in the town's life, in those days and now. Where was your father's tailor shop, and how did it relate? Was there an intact black business community in the Silver 50s?
No, a business like tailoring and certain other businesses somehow enjoyed a very unique position. For example, my father's business was almost entirely 80% his clientele were white, and he did the alterations for the downtown stores, Belk Hudson, as it was called, that during those days, Barchet's, Limehouse men's stores. And I worked during the summer months, and then sometimes on weekends I worked for my father. I didn't ever learn how to really do any tailoring, but I did deliver the clothes back to the stores after he finished the alterations. And then I would at the end of the week, take the bills and go to the stores and then collect the money. And then my father would give me my little weekly allowance that way as well.
Mm-hmm. You got a camera when you were still, I don't even think 10 years old, and that would obviously in some ways set you on the course that became your life's work. So maybe you could recall your first camera and how you moved forward from there.
Yes, my first camera, which was given to me by, I think, my brother. My brother had inherited the camera. I think my mother had purchased the camera, a Kodak Baby Brownie, which I still have, and by the way, which still works. But it was, as my brother's interest grew to music and blowing a saxophone, he gave me the camera, and of course I started taking pictures, and I was fascinated by the fact that you could capture an image and then see it. And it was much later in my life that I discovered, of course, how to set up a dark room and developing my own pictures. But as I took pictures for people on Sundays, I would have them develop, and this also became my hustle because I could earn $1 or $2 on Sundays of people dressed up in their fineries at the Edisto Gardens, which is a local garden where we have, of course, water running. The Edisto River runs through it, and we have many roses and other varieties of things growing, and it becomes a very popular place for both black and white citizens, of course, to go there and walk around the gardens and take pictures and lay on the grass, and so it was a very popular place. And incidentally, it was open to people of all races at the time as well. It was one of the places. So you had very unusual kinds of barriers. Again, a place like that was open, but curiously, a drive-in theater was closed to blacks. Since you would arrive in your own automobile, but blacks could not go to drive-ins, but yet we could go to the stationary establishment, but we would just sit upstairs or downstairs, as it was sometimes. So we had at that time the Edisto Theater, and there was also a black movie theater at the time, which was right across the street from South Carolina State and Claflin University. And on Saturdays as a youth, with my box of popcorn, I would sit in there and watch the great movies of those days, and the series of movies that came out, like Captain Midnight and Captain Marvel and The Phantom and Roy Rogers and Dale Evans and Gene Autry. And the series would be that the main character would get into some kind of trouble and almost reach the end of he would have some perilous situation which would occur, but you'd have to come back next week to see what ultimately outcome. And so I grew up with that kind of background. Of course, it was a culture that was developing right underneath my very eyes, and of being receiving experiences from, of course, of motion pictures. Motion pictures were a very important part of my development as a person, because it would, being a aspiring photographer, the imagery of how that was done and the process itself. I remember seeing at a very early age Gone with the Wind, which at that time was a great accomplishment in cinema production, and MGM producing this very long motion picture that really depicted the Old South and the fact of the changes coming, as denoted by the name Gone with the Wind.
Would you say that your household was a race-conscious household? Were civil rights, were race issues things that you talked about around the dinner table, or was it obviously something that was active and alive in the community? Was it at your dinner table?
Yes, but we did not encounter the barriers until, of course, we left our what I thought was a very comfortable household. And I don't think I could ever say that there was one day when, even though my family was low income, I don't think there was ever one day that we didn't have to eat what we wanted to eat. So I have very caring parents and grandparents, as it turned out, as sometimes my mother and father would leave me in the custody of my grandmother, who was, of course, again, very wise. She had the wisdom, of course, years of living under, her entire life, she grew up under segregation. But from my mother's side, we grew up also with another kind of denominator that was kind of puzzling, because we were of mixed race. On my father's side, Indian and black, and on my mother's side, black and white. So this was kind of puzzling, because my mother was of a skin color that if you saw her, you would not know what race she was. And my father, of course, coming with an Indian background, Indian and black. So it was very confusing to a youth of 8 or 9 years old as to where to fit and how to fit into this very mixed bag of racial placement that we were had to adhere to or abide by, or the other thing that was puzzling was that the fact that I grew up at a time when all this was state-sanctioned segregation, legal segregation. It's a little difference between, I think, that kind of segregation and maybe and some other type of segregation, but legal segregation, where the state and I guess the nation, the county puts up signs in the courthouse that says white water fountain, colored water fountain. The state, which runs the schools, and the city, which runs the schools, says you can't go to this particular school if you are colored. So the places where we were able to go to school or shop, take a bus, we had federal, state, city, and county regulation of these laws that affected me as an African American growing up.
Sure.
During the time.
Sure.
Yes.
When did you first connect your camera to civil?
Joe, let's stop for a second. Over back.
We just took a short break.
Okay.
Mr. Williams, when did you first connect your camera and the issue of race?
Well, probably around 12 or 13 years old. Maybe even,
37.
I was born in 1937, yes. Maybe even earlier, but looking back and when I was gathering information for the books that I have published, this was something that I also was kind of trying to connect and get all the dates right. But of course, a lot of my photographs begin, of course, in my own household and my family and the surrounding areas. But probably around 11 or 12 years old, I have a mentor, E.C. Jones, from Sumter, South Carolina, and he was called in to take photographs of in the churches of Clarendon County, where the Briggs and DeLane and Pearson families are beginning a battle that becomes really the catalyst of the Briggs versus Elliott petition. And Jones found out that I was a photographer and that I had a camera, and of course he would sometimes pick me up from Sumter and take me into those church meetings on Sunday, and there we began taking what became the photographs that appear in many books today of the Briggs petitioners, the DeLane family. And I grew up, seeing this happening, but not totally understanding what was going on.
You were that young?
Yes.
Wow.
No. And a lot of times, Jones' studio by the name was Majestic Studio. And sometimes in the pictures that I might have taken, or sometimes the ones that he took, you might see his camera, which had on it, again, Majestic Studio. Sumter was a very important city at that time because we had the Air Force base there, and Jones would purchase the out-of-date film supplies and paper supplies, and then he would give that to me. And as I began to develop get my darkroom going, he would also sometimes kind of compensate me for my time. And as he became the official photographer of South Carolina State College, he pulled me into, of course, taking pictures for State. Because if I could take pictures at State College, that would save him an 80-mile round trip coming from Sumter. But as the NAACP and Reverend J.A. DeLane, called him into action, of course, and then, of course, I accompanied him, and that's how many of the photographs that we come up with relative to Briggs versus Elliott.
Sure.
That case, those are how those came about.
Yeah. Two questions. One quick aside. How did you first become connected to Mr. Jones?
Well, Mr. Jones was a very close friend of my, at one time my high school principal, and one time my high school teacher, Mr. Robert Howard. They were, of course, at one time students at South Carolina State College. So Mr. Howard recommended to Jones that, of course, he knew I had a camera. And my better cameras, by the way, were also were the cameras that I used that the high school bought. For example, I remember using, of course, I was fascinated by film, and of course they had the 16 millimeter Bell and Howell camera, and the 4x5 Crown and Speed graphic, and the 2.25 by 3.25 Speed and Crown graphic cameras were among the cameras that my high school allowed me to. Well, not only high school, but actually when I was in 9th and 10th grade, I was able to use those very expensive cameras at the time, more so than the cameras that I had. I grew up taking photographs with the first camera, of course, was a Baby Brownie, but it had no flash unit, so I could not take a picture of anything that required a flash unit. But I think I took one of the first pictures with a flash unit and a flash bulb. Of course, I have a picture of Thurgood Marshall coming off the train.
You think that might have been your first?
Well, that wasn't one of the first pictures, but it was like, but see, a flash bulb at the time. Yeah. Keep in mind, you can buy a camera for maybe $15 at the time from Sears Roebuck. But the flash part of it, the flash bulb, was sort of out of sync, because a flash bulb, in comparison to what you could buy a camera for, was very expensive. And it only flashed one time, and it was gone. And so typically I would go, and maybe at 13 years old, as I did, take pictures of wedding, and I'm putting 12 pictures in the bride's wedding album, and I only took 15 pictures of the whole wedding. So, because if they were taken with a flash, that was a very expensive part of it. But the photograph of Thurgood Marshall coming off the train happened because a gentleman by the name, who was the president of the NAACP, took me to Charleston, because in my mind he had described this big lawyer that was coming down from New York, and they had this big trial going on in Charleston, South Carolina. And that's when I took Thurgood Marshall on one of his trips to the South, where he got off the Silver Meteor, and I snapped this picture of him on the Silver Meteor.
The president of the state NAACP then was?
The president of the Orangeburg branch at the time was a gentleman by the name of Squire Morgan.
Exactly.
Yes.
And the state?
The state at that time, I don't know.
Okay.
I only became aware of the state presidents of the NAACP, at a later.
Reverend Newman and folks like that.
Reverend Newman, though. Reverend Newman, of course, was also a good friend of Robert Howard. And of course, he would sometimes come and get me out of school, and so a lot of times my field trips are really have become really, it was an exercise in what was turning out to be the civil rights movement.
Sounds fair to say, and you can tell me if I'm right, that that these gentlemen who were at that forefront, on that front edge of trying to advance the movement, recognized even then photographs of this activity can be very helpful.
Yes.
And we need to be careful about this and think carefully about it, and that's...
Yes. Also, the photographs were necessary because of this. The local newspaper very rarely had news of interest to African Americans at the time, to colored people. In fact, once in a while there was a section in the paper called News of Interest to Colored People that would appear once a week, and it would just be a little bit. But of course, any action to demonstrate or protest would never be in there. So it was because of that void that I began taking pictures for the news agencies that reach beyond Orangeburg. So I started taking pictures for the Afro-American, the Pittsburgh Courier, and of course, ultimately at 15 years old, I become an official correspondent for Jet magazine. Jet comes into Orangeburg from Chicago. The story is developing and ongoing, and they need somebody to continuously cover it. And at 15 years old, they make me a correspondent for a national magazine. So that was, and the money they pay you, to me, at that time, $35 for a photograph was a lot of money. To a person my age at that time.
Sure.
And
we'll come right back up, but I want to have you, if you would, and you were just an adolescent, but take us back to one of those meetings in Clarendon County, and describe the people and the atmosphere and the mood and?
Well, it takes place in many different time periods. Number one, most of the early people involved in the Clarendon County and the Briggs case, many of them were run away. They lost their jobs and they were forced to leave. So a lot of the pictures that Mr. Jones and I took were pictures of celebrations and pictures when they gathered together again at the churches for a commemoration or an award ceremony. And we came to photograph those ceremonies and those award presentations and gathering of and then sometimes at the request of the newspapers when they were asked to gather together. Of course, the entire Briggs petitioners get together at St. Mark, and those photographs took place. It's also interesting at this time from the standpoint of most historians is that Clarendon County and Orangeburg begin at such a early part of this, and really they are the ones that are creating the catalyst from which the base of all the civil rights movement begins. But at this time, it's not even known as the civil rights movement. It's so early on into this newfound way of say, trying to bring down these barriers that it doesn't seem to become known as a civil rights movement until really about 1955 when Martin Luther King and Rosa Parks with the Montgomery bus boycott. But the Briggs petition is beginning 10 and 15 years earlier, and the Brown versus Board of Education case, the catalyst, the template, the case that really started the Thurgood Marshall and the entire legal arm of the NAACP off in this direction was created by the Briggs case in Clarendon County, starting off in the beginning as a bus transportation effort to get a bus for the children, and then later developing in as the case went to Charleston on the Waring. Then Thurgood Marshall suddenly becomes aware that, hey, this might be it, rather than having to go the way the NAACP was going and having to maybe sue every school district in the entire United States in order to achieve equality in education. Here was a case that might be the template for what they were looking for.
Do you remember when Brown came down in May of '54? You were in high school.
When Brown?
When the Brown decision came down in May of 1954.
Oh yes, I was. Yes,
yeah.
yes.
What are your memories of that? How that rippled through the community?
Well, again, because of the dangers associated with this in the early stages, and again, the Briggs people, you see, were forced to leave, and the Delane people were forced to. Reverend Delane, who, by the way, my mother taught under Reverend Delane, and that's also how I have a close association with the Delanes, because my mother was a school teacher under him. You have this danger aspect of that's not often written about, that's associated with it, that you don't really just talk about this, because anyone talking about this might find themselves visited by the Ku Klux Klan, or you might find yourself, if you're working for, see, the employment situation was mostly in control of whites, and almost everything, any type of employment was really at the mercy of the white leaders. And if you in any way were found to be associated with this effort to overthrow their way of life, your livelihood or sometimes your life was also in danger. So I remember, to answer specifically your question about what did I think after the Brown versus Board of Education case occurred, it was one that was sometime, in very low tones discussed, and you only discussed it maybe within the Black society that you and other people that you knew, but just generally out there. And now, if you're going back to 1956, this was something that was not the celebration that you might think that it would be, in that it was the pivotal case that brought this all to a turning point.
Yeah, it's fascinating because you already knew from that direct personal experience with these families that the consequences could be
Yes,
so charged with violence, so charged with this,
yes.
with the ultimate, all these ultimate consequences. Yeah.
And in the small parts of Orangeburg County and Ellery and other little cities in Cameron, you see here you had an extreme form of racism that was also violence attached to it. So there are many kinds of stories that have never been reported about people who just disappeared. And
Had that kind of violence, that extrajudicial racial violence, the Klan, others have formally or informally organized, had that impinged on your immediate family directly or near extended family in your childhood years?
no, my mother and father warned me about it, though. Some white businessmen went to my father and told him that I'd better, they advised him to advise me that I'd better be careful because they began to note that my pictures were appearing in the magazines and newspapers, and outside agitators were using me to report on what was going on here. And
Tell me some warnings that your parents have told you growing up.
so probably 3 times maybe they went to him, and my mother was sort of isolated from it in that she was a part of the school system, and knowing what happened to Reverend Delane, she often talked to me in a kind of a hushed way because, you see, again, people of my mother and father's era and the time they grew up in, they learned to deal with segregation and what was happening all around them, and they formed sort of an accommodation type of relationship in a way to get along and also to put bread on the table. If they were actually going out alone, they would be again subject to all kinds of situations which would have interrupted their lives. The unity that they later become a part of in the demonstrations that developed in the late 50s and after in the early 60s, of course, then together they were able to then participate and then join forces, and they lose any individual isolated attempts to antagonize them or fire them or what have you. But when it was in the early years, it was very dangerous to. It was, again, here are people coming together, and we're talking about trying to change the state and federal, and we're talking about constitutional change and things that would affect that, and overthrowing state government. And this is more or less looked upon as being anti-government or anti-treason or something. You see, we were, it could be met with all kinds of ways, and then a legality attached to it as well by the governing sources.
Did your parents ever find it necessary to ask you to stop doing this work?
No, in fact, my parents supported my efforts. They saw the advances and they purchased me the cameras. I remember doing a very severe thunderstorm, and during those days, of course, you were taught to, and maybe even now, taught to kind of remain quiet during a very heavy downpour and thunderstorm. I remember this particular time that as the storm was developing, I lay down on the floor, and my mother laid on the top of the bed. And as we were waiting for the storm to pass, and we of course cut off all the lights, and my father is on a chair also, and everybody's remaining quiet. And I remember this was my way. I had a captive audience there to sort of beg my mother for that camera that I had seen in the Sayers and Roebuck catalog. And so that's when I took the advantage of, and they ordered me a Brownie Hawkeye, I think, camera. And this was the camera, of course, with the flash unit attached with it. And at that time, I think $75 from Sayers and Roebuck. And this was the way that you got something, because the stores in Orangeburg or Columbia or Charleston probably would not carry that. There were no camera stores as I remember even in the larger cities like Columbia or Charleston. So you would order things like this. And photography was not nearly as popular. Maybe there might have been in African American society, maybe one out of 10 families might have had a camera.
Right.
So me having a camera was very rare at the time.
Exactly. Yeah. Let me we've talked a little bit about Clarendon County and how it set an early path towards Brown. Orangeburg will be a place where immediately after Brown, you get an unusual movement
Yes.
quickly emerge.
Yes.
And just before we get to that, I want to ask one more thing. I know in early 1955, the Klan is also active in response to Brown and the climate created by
Yes.
Brown, and the political climate shifts on race, etc., becomes a very active consideration. You photographed a KKK rally.
Well, not exactly.
Okay.
I attended a KKK rally. Yes. It happened that I covered, I at this particular stage of my life, I was a contributor to the Orangeburg Times and Democrat. I took pictures for them of wrecks, and I chased fires and things like that because they would pay me $5 for my photographs. And of course, anything happening in Orangeburg, I felt myself to be somewhat of a correspondent for them. So,
And that was the standard everyday white newspaper.
right,
Yep.
that is correct, yes. So I remember this particular incident where I went to a basketball game at Wilkinson High School, and I took pictures for the yearbook and the newspaper, of course, which I was also the editor and I was also the photographer. And the Klan rally, which was held on the Belleville Road in a wooded area, was announced in the paper. And when I read it, without really thoroughly thinking a lot about it, and without asking my parents, and of course I must have been about 14 because I knew I had my driver's license, and of course I could drive, and this gave me access to moving around and taking pictures. So I left the game, and I said, well, I'll run by and see that Klan rally, not realizing that it was really held not for blacks to attend, but really to intimidate people in the community, African Americans in the community. So when I got there, the Klan rally was already over, but there remained, and out front there were about 2 or 3 cars, and one of the cars was a highway patrol car, and there was a truck, I think, and one other car, which I did not know who it belonged to, but standing there at the end of the Ku Klux Klan rally was this highway patrolman and the Grand Dragon, who had taken off his hood, and they were there talking, and also they were putting out the remains of the cross burning because it was all over and everybody had left. And so here I come, I park my car on the Belleville Road, and I walk up to them, and they looked at each other and looked back at me and say, well, what is this guy, here, does he not know any better? So I go up to him and I said, looks like everything is over, or something like that. I don't remember exactly what I said. But anyway, they were puzzled and confused at the fact that I'm here. This young African American has come to take a picture of this. And what they, I remember, as when I asked them, and they said, yeah, it's already over. Then I turned around to leave. And as I was leaving, they called me back and said, well, do you want to take a picture of us, here? And I said, yeah. So what happened, the cross, the burned out cross was then, it was laying on the ground. And then, so the 3 of us re-erected the cross, and the Ku Klux Klan's dragon and the Highway Patrol and I re-erected the cross, and they stood in front of it, and I took a picture of it. So when I told my mother, what I'd done, she said, she really kind of was very angry because she realized that I had put myself in danger. But being so naive about, the whole thing, it didn't occur to me years later that I had put myself into the danger. And that's one of the pictures that, of course, I have lost. I cannot find my images of that today. But I often think about the fact that, that these were very dangerous times. But on the other hand, there were a lot of instances where I, being an African American of a lighter skin complexion, I find myself really breaking barriers myself for my race, because at I think 18 years old, and then really accelerating my interest in photography, I want to become a member of the South Carolina Professional Photographers of America. And there were no African American members. And I read that they were meeting at Hilton Head, South Carolina for a membership meeting. So I called up the membership chairperson, Dan Bowen of Walterboro, and asked him about attending. He said, well, I don't know. He said, we don't have any, colored photographers. So he talked to someone. He called me back. He said, sure, we'd be very happy to have you. So I found myself in Hilton Head, South Carolina, and there is a picture, of course, that I have where we are all standing together as a group. And of course, I'm the only African American. And there were other incidents during my life that I find myself kind of breaking barriers. And even though it's not open, just because I tried, just like when I tried to take the picture and I attended the Ku Klux Klan rally, that I found myself being accepted and let in or become a part of. Leading up to during my semester break when I was at Claflin University, I remembered visiting my aunt and uncle during the semester break and read in the newspaper that Senator John F. Kennedy was going to be at the Roosevelt Hotel and to make an announcement. At this time, Kennedy, there was speculation as to whether he would become a candidate, as there were others also contemplating running for the presidency, but he had not announced yet.
This is January 1960.
This is about January 1960. And as it turned out, there I am in this room, in a ballroom in downtown New York, and the security people notice me. And at this time, there are very few African Americans in journalism, even with the New York Times and other very liberal newspapers at the time. And they walk over to the hotel, walk over to the to where I am rather in the ballroom, and they began to remove me from the room. And just at the moment they were putting me out, Senator Kennedy and his wife were coming up to the podium, and they stopped them. And he came over and we talked a few minutes. He gave me one of his cards, and he asked me about why I was there and that kind of thing. And I told him that in my political science class at Claflin, we had discussed the fact that he might be a great president if he were to run, or he was to announce, if he was to announce. And anyway, he after we talked for a few minutes, and again, here's this room full of press, and here I am, they're talking with the person that would later become the president of the United States. And anyway, he asked, he cleared 2 seats and told me to sit down here. And I sat down by Chet Huntley and David Brinkley, who were on the front row. And this gave me a great, I didn't have a telephoto lens. And of course, most of the still press photographers were they had them situated in the back of the room. And the TV people had, of course, the best view. But all the still photographers were way back in the back. So this gave me very good close-up pictures of then Senator John F. Kennedy. The significance of me being there, though, I think it was the most opportune time, because it was at this press conference that he announced that he would be a candidate. And so I send my pictures to him at Hyannisport, Massachusetts, wherever he is on the campaign trail during the time on his road to the presidency. I get an invitation to attend. When he lands in Columbia, South Carolina, I'm the only press person allowed to go in the Caroline airplane, which was his 10-seater plane that he used to fly around and campaign. And here I find myself, in conversation often with, again, a gentleman that becomes one of our greatest American presidents. So there's a, unbelievable story come true that I had that kind of association with a person that, again, on the background of that, Johnson, of course, the enactment of the Civil Rights Acts and so forth lead from that. But I was very much disturbed, of course, by his early death and all the things that happened as a result of that.
Sure.
But again, one of the most fascinating parts of my life growing up as a photographer were those events that surrounded that.
Yeah. Let's pause just a second here, John, if we could.
We're cooking.
We're back on after a short break. Mr. Williams, let me ask you to let's spend some time talking about the emergence of the movement after Brown in Orangeburg. We've talked about the fact that there are 2 black colleges here, a very strong black community of substantial size relative to the town's population and such. But Orangeburg will really be a place where you have a level and an intensity of early protest that, as we were talking before we started the interview, is oftentimes lost from the narratives written by historians about these years. And so let's spend some time really talking about that.
Orangeburg is vital, and in my way, of the second of 4 incidents, in my opinion, that really created America's civil rights movement. And you see, most of the people that were involved with the early Briggs case and DeLane and Pearson, they were run out of Clarendon County, and they are not here. But there's a gentleman by the name of Billy DeLane, and there were other leaders over there that still remained, and they were steadfast in resisting any. They were self-employed, and they could exist, say, without being ostracized or their loans called in and other things that the system used to fight back against this integration attempt to do what they were doing. So what happened? The movement then spreads to Orangeburg, second most. And that's why I think it is also a battleground, again, almost never mentioned in any history books other than my own, as being really one of the second battlegrounds, or the second of 4 events that lead to the creation of America's civil rights movement. And what happened here, again, the importance of it is that the closeness with the 2 communities. We are really 30 miles from Summerton, South Carolina. And only 24 miles, I think, you have where the county line are. So it also, its importance to the civil rights movement also underscored by the fact that where does Thurgood Marshall come to after the Brown versus Board of Education victory? He comes back to Clarendon County and Orangeburg, South Carolina, and speaks at the gymnasium on Claflin University. And he inspires then, in about 1955, the community of Orangeburg to be one of the first in the nation to encourage their parents, to send their children in a test of the Supreme Court's ruling. So Orangeburg, again, becomes an early testing ground of the Brown versus Board of Education premise. And so...
Forgive me the interruption.
Yes.
Can you tell me a little bit more about that appearance by Marshall, as you recall?
Thurgood Marshall. Well, Thurgood Marshall, who I remember very vividly as being a very powerful, very in his mannerisms and his voice, and he also used to curse quite a bit. And you can imagine my joy in being able to associate, because of the fact that I'm the one here in Orangeburg almost exclusively, that I'm on the inside of the movement. And most any other kind of press that would be associated with this, because they would not be African American, they would be on the outside of the movement. So here I am have this very inside position as a photographer. But so when Thurgood Marshall comes back to Orangeburg, of course, I get in on the meetings and get to take a picture when they're talking. I remember him talking with the leaders of that time, say James Sultan, Matthew McCollum, and others. And he speaks at, again, the Seabrook Gymnasium. And it becomes a rally, and it becomes a time when funds are needed to try to support the ongoing effort. And you also have on the stage, sitting with him, other national civil rights leaders who have also come back with him. And I remember riding in a car where Thurgood Marshall is in the front seat and I'm in the back, and there are two other persons, and we go from visiting people that have again sacrificed a lot to the civil rights movement, and also people that were willing to actually help financially, who were able to financially assist with the movement. And then, of course, on the evening of the rally, he makes this a presentation before a crowd of around, I think, 1,100 people. The gymnasium is full, it's packed. And it's a time when I'm using a 4x5 Crown graphic, and also I think I have a Rolleiflex camera at the time as well. And I'm taking photographs of this rally, and I have probably in the entire series of photographs, perhaps maybe a dozen pictures. Unfortunately, my negatives are beginning to deteriorate. My 4x5 negatives of Thurgood Marshall have begun to kind of curl up, and it looks like a cancer is almost eating them. And my 120 size negatives are beginning to fade away. Fortunately, around 20 years ago, I began, well, it might not have been that long, because I remember it would have to be 17 years ago, when I was working on Freedom and Justice. And we were in the early years of digital. I scanned them in on floppy disks, and now I have preserved those images. And my images of John F. Kennedy, Senator Kennedy, also beginning to fade away. And I've tried over years to maybe get some sort of grant, because I have probably maybe 100,000 images that maybe only a very few have been scanned, and really they have appeared in the books that I have published. But Thurgood Marshall, again, was one of the most impressive people I've seen. And actually, I did not associate him with being that person that maybe 7 years earlier or 4 years earlier that I had photographed in Charleston, South Carolina. Because again, in the mind of an 11-year-old, you're photographing someone, and I only have a chance to take one picture, and that's him coming off the train. And then I think, I'm not sure whether we stayed in Charleston that night or whether we came back, but I remember that we could not get in the courthouse during the Briggs hearings in Charleston, South Carolina. But getting back to Thurgood, again, he was just an amazing person. And the opportunity that I had in being with him, and the opportunities I had of photographing, again, a person that becomes a United States president, again, it was almost as if it had a divine purpose in mind that I be present to get those kind of events that really become the almost South Carolina's exclusive heritage, and give some credibility to a lot of the individuals that came out of that. The fact that this really happened. For example, I have pictures almost exclusively of a group of people that paid quite a price, the Ellery school teachers. And in no other publication other than mine has what they did been reported. And now other history books are beginning to pick up on this. So again, I felt that it was my defining moment as a photographer to maybe to be present, to really capture these events, and then now have them so that history can be faithfully recorded, and they be utilized as we go forward. I really believe that the civil rights movement and the revolution that we engaged in and participated and marched and demonstrated, I think it will have a greater importance 50 to 75 to 100 years from now than it does now. We who have lived through it, and the historians, I think, of tomorrow will see that it was a more important it was one of the most important times of history, because the fact that you have America in this very I guess in a way I could describe it as being between a rock and a hard place. Here America is with the emerging democracy that they're trying to position themselves worldwide, and other countries noting that they are not treating African Americans fair. And the civil rights movement helped to establish America as a country of integrity, a country where morality and the freedom and justice and the equality of all citizens. I think this came out of the civil rights movement. And America, I think, is a better country today for everyone because of the civil rights movement. And so I think that future historians will connect this a little better than the present historians have.
You said it very in describing the rally in the gym on Claflin's campus in '55 with Thurgood Marshall. You reminded me of something that I think would be very interesting to have you talk about. You graduated high school in '56.
Yes.
And I'd like you to talk about the following a little bit, because I think it says a lot about the realities that prevailed at the time. You're offered President Turner, I believe,
Yes.
at
Yes.
State,
Yes.
offers you a scholarship.
Yes.
That will be rescinded. You'll
Yes.
later get an offer, sort of a parallel offer to
Yes.
match that in a way,
Yes.
from Claflin.
Yes.
And the one is a state-backed institution that draws some of its funding from the state.
Yes.
Claflin has its roots in the Methodist Church.
Yes.
Can you, by telling that story, can you illuminate the different pressures and tensions, say, on President Turner and on the leadership at Claflin, and how those realities shape that kind of story?
Yes, well, first of all, my photographs that appeared in Jet magazine of a student rising in late 1955. The students had come, you might say, to the assistance of Orangeburg citizens who were involved in trying to overcome. They had their parents had sent their children had asked to petition school District 5 to send their children to school.
Yeah, this is crucial. You're
Okay.
right. That there's an early petition in Orangeburg by black parents
Yes.
to integrate the schools.
And again, the path from that was, again, Thurgood Marshall's visit. And then the parents are encouraged and they petition to integrate the schools.
In fact, you provide an image of that original petition in Freedom and Justice.
Yes.
Yes.
Yes. So what happens, again, as State and Claflin students are urged to get involved, we have a student leader by the name of Fred Moore, the Student Government Association, and he is ultimately expelled for leading the students who are supporting the citizens of Orangeburg in a boycott, in a counter boycott. And of course, at the time, this is, in a lot of papers, national news. New York Times carries stories. This is on the Jet magazine, the opening story, and so forth. And
Mr. Williams,
yes.
Forgive me.
Yes.
Can you tell that in a little bit more detail?
Okay.
The activity by whites to pressure these black petition signers,
Yes.
and how the events unfolded.
Yes, as the parents who signed the petition to send their kids to school, their names are noted in the local newspaper. And then some receive threats, intimidation. Some people have loans calling in. And then there are others that, and the list dwindles down from around 20 down to around 9, I think it ultimately. And what happens, whatever way the people, the whites in Orangeburg, a white group forms called the Citizens Council, and they seem to be the source of the pressure. And anyone supporting the cause of the parents sending their kids to school, of course, is also subject to some kind of pressure. So black citizens bound together and they form a counter boycott. and they come up with a selective a list of selected merchants that they will not support, who are members of the Citizen Council. And one in particular is the owner of the Coca-Cola bottling plant. Another is the owner of the Exxon Distributing. At that time, it's called Esso Gasoline. And the persons owning those companies, again, their businesses are then boycotted. And merchants downtown who are known to support the Citizen Council, they are boycotted by Orangeburg citizens. And it was this boycott effort that South Carolina State and Claflin students joined to support. And then Fred Moore, being the Student Government Association leader, he is expelled by B.C. Turner. Turner is a person that really, he's between a rock and a hard place, I think I describe his position being that, again, here he is employed by the state of South Carolina, and in effect, the board of trustees at this time is an all-white trustee board, and Moore is expelled, and as a result of my photographs of Moore and the student demonstrations appearing, and also photographs appearing in Jet that embarrassed Turner, as I was graduating from college, I had high school, I had a fully paid scholarship to attend South Carolina State College, and Turner then, because of my photographs appearing in Jet, then rescinds on the scholarship through a gentleman by the name of Mr. Harold Crawford. He instructs him to tell me that my scholarship is rescinded and that I would not be welcome at State College. At the same time this is happening, there's a new president occurring or being elected to Claflin University, Dr. H.V. Manning. He learns about this incident and then gives me a scholarship. In fact, the exact same conditions and benefits that Turner had offered me. And of course it was ideal, and probably more ideal, that I go to Claflin because I wanted to be closest to my profession, and art was close to photography. So it was where I studied photography and then obtained my degree from Claflin University in art.
Yeah. Let's talk a little bit more about the unfolding movement in Orangeburg after Fred Moore's expulsion.
Yes.
And those next several years, because really the movement will remain active for years.
Yes, and especially in Orangeburg. See, Orangeburg again. You have the unique thing about Orangeburg is you have in a very small town two African American colleges. One is the state-supported South Carolina State University, and the other Claflin. And so you have this melting pot, you might say, and students coming in from all over the state, all over the nation, and it's something that you don't find in too many cities other than especially the size of Orangeburg. So again, it becomes very important because, again, because of the conditions of the time, here are African Americans at a period in history when they are trying to make the words of the Supreme Court's ruling, they're trying to make it live out what the Supreme Court has ruled, and it's not. You have Southern resistance. You have everything going very slow towards that goal, and the students, unlike their parents, are not going to. They're going to want this to happen now, and so they move into action. And you find the early involvement of student activism occurring, and Orangeburg is at the epicenter of all of this, even before Greensboro.
Well before Greensboro.
And again, history has got it really out of whack in the importance, because here you have in the modern civil rights movement, you have Orangeburg again appearing before Greensboro, but Greensboro gets all the attention.
Yeah.
And Martin Luther King and Rosa Parks getting all the attention in Montgomery, Alabama, and here is the Briggs situation happening that created the platform from which Martin Luther King and Rosa Parks were even reacting from. That is Brown versus Board of Education.
Exactly.
So
let me just to clarify one thing, just to make sure my understanding of the one thing about the petition is clear.
yes,
As I've read, and in fact probably also drawing on your work,
yes,
one of the concerns that prompted that quick and aggressive reaction from the Citizens Council in Orangeburg when that group of black parents petitioned the school board was this was very soon after Brown, and a great fear that on the part of the white community that, oh my gosh, there may be no alternative legal result from a standing petition but the desegregation.
yes.
So they were trying to literally sort of erase all names, have the petition become moot because everyone had withdrawn. Is that correct?
Yes, they were trying to put pressure on them for them to withdraw their names.
So that there would be no existing petition at that point.
Correct, yes, yes.
Fascinating.
And my turns out that Arthur Rose, my art teacher, was one of the signers. He was from Charleston, South Carolina, and often our art education classes would turn into discussion about the movement because he was so much involved, and he was willing to put his children, and he put his name, and he's one of the signatures, and again, a very unforgettable, a very creative person, but yet he was, he had a very fiery attitude. He wanted it to happen, and he was willing to give probably his life to make it happen. Yes.
You've just mentioned Mr. Rose, Professor Rose, and earlier you mentioned that the group of school teachers. And can you give that account? What happened with the teachers? And of course, you would photograph their.
Yes, after Brown, the state of South Carolina is just in turmoil. They're trying to find all kinds of ways to circumvent the Supreme Court's ruling, and you have some schools with the threat of opening their doors to African Americans. They're even just closing their schools down, and in Cameron, South Carolina, 9 miles from here. In fact, you have the one school that just closed up. But you also have reaction from the all-white legislature in Columbia, where they are trying to think of and pass all kinds of laws to again circumvent the Supreme Court's ruling. And one of the rulings or the legislative actions calls for any teacher to declare before they are reemployed for the upcoming school year, to declare whether they are members of the NAACP. The elementary school teachers in April of 1956, rather than sign this document stating that they are not members, they prefer to resign. The school principal, Mr. Davis, knows of my involvement with Jet Magazine, feels this is a historical moment, that these teachers are taking this very serious, this is a very serious action. They're giving up their jobs. He calls me to photograph them. The teachers, after I arrived, they all line up in front of their school, and I take a picture in front of the elementary training school. And they, again, the importance of their action is sort of underscored by the fact that at this time, Jet Magazine is about that big a magazine, and the centerfold being right in the middle. And at this time, this picture is across the 2 pages of the Jet Magazine. And it becomes the largest picture ever published in Jet Magazine at the time. And they are called by Jet Magazine as quiet heroes, because again, they weren't involved in marching. They just preferred to give up their jobs rather than deny. The NAACP was really being outlawed in as many kinds of ways. They were thinking, the state legislators and politicians were trying to come up with all kinds of methods to really say that the NAACP was communist inspired. They were trying to make it very, in any community, especially Orangeburg, membership in the NAACP was considered to be very risky, because if you worked, and again, the employment is almost totally in the hands of white citizens. if you were found to be an NAACP supporter, you might be dismissed just for that. And the problem too being that if whites who didn't want to do this were found not to do this, then they would receive pressure from the Citizen Council and other white citizens. So it just ricocheted like that. So they, in effect, almost had to do many things they didn't even want to do. But the Ellery school teachers, of course, their effort was in some way seemingly, as soon as they resigned, their positions were filled by other African Americans who did not were not on the same persuasion, and I always felt very upset the fact that here are these teachers giving up their jobs, and then their job is being really filled very fast for persons that were not involved in the movement. The teachers, by the way, many of them never were able to regain employment again in South Carolina at the time, and they were ostracized for quite a few years to come. There are probably less than 3 of them alive today, and most of them live in the Orangeburg area. And at Claflin University a few years ago, we reconvened the existing persons that signed, and I think that they are, again, representative of the kind of heroism that came from so many individuals, too numerous to name, who were in the at the ground roots level of the civil rights movement. So many nameless people who did so many things that, again, will go unnoticed unless we record their actions. And so I've tried to do this with my publications.
Exactly, and all of your work is such a record of that history. Yeah. Let me ask about one more thing, and then maybe we'll take a break and come back and do some of the events after 1960. But you graduated in 1960 and
Yes.
opened a photography studio.
Yes.
And you're quite a young man still, obviously,
Mm-hmm.
early 20s. You're just married.
Mm-hmm.
How did you, and of course all of the civil rights context is all around you.
Yes.
How were you going to make a living in Orangeburg with a new photography studio? How did you measure your prospects, and what was going to pay
Yes.
your bills?
Well, there are, at this time, a black business, because of the separation of the communities, a lot of times you had support from black citizens, and that was a unique aspect of it rather than white citizens. And so I could expect support from the black citizens very easily. And State College in Claflin, of course, were main contractors with me, and they gave me work because I did their yearbooks and their newspapers and so forth. And but also my clients came from the students who were at State. They could just walk across the track. But at this advantage point, though, it gave me the unique opportunity of whenever there was a demonstration or a march and that I didn't even know about, they would have to pass right in front of my business. And all I had to do was just go outside and take a picture of them as they were getting ready to march. And often that happened. I didn't even know there was going to be a march, and I'd go outside and see everyone marching. I'd just go outside, and I have a couple pictures in my book of, across the street from my studio where they were marching in front of my studio.
What was the street address of that studio?
The name of my studio?
The street address.
Well, that was on Boulevard. And they were, you see, Boulevard runs right in front of the college campuses. You have College Avenue being the street right in front of the campus, and Boulevard being the street that my business was on, yes. And as well as other black businesses, barbershops and so forth and what have you. So it was my front seat to history.
Yeah.
Yes.
How about we take a short break?
Okay. We're rolling.
We're back after a short break. Mr. Williams, I thought we could now turn our attention, say, to 1960, and after Greensboro, very shortly after Greensboro, of course, here in Orangeburg, demonstrations will be renewed. U.S. and other places. Can you describe the emergence of that protest activity here and how you interacted with it, both as a photographer and at times as a participant?
I've noticed through that books of history have recorded incidents of the civil rights movement, and they are like here and here, and this incident here. But Orangeburg's involvement in the civil rights movement, seemingly it was like a continuous. There was always something going on from, say, about 47 all the way up through 1968. There was always something going on. Orangeburg was always involved in protests, demonstrations, or some type of activity, and they're continuous. That was because I think of the steadfast attitude of citizens who were, again, very close to the Clarendon County situation. Here was where this great movement had risen from this particular area, and they wanted to see it completed. And so in about 1960, we find the students at State and Claflin still involved in one movement or another. Everything connected to the fact that here we are trying to implement and make to help to make the Supreme Court's ruling really a reality, so that it would affect and be here on every level a reality that we could look forward to. Because of the unevenness throughout the nation of employment and opportunities, and the way that African Americans were treated in court and in legal situations, it was just something that needed to be done. And this movement and the momentum that it was undergoing, and a metamorphosis from just being things going on as usual, it had to change. Something had to be done about the conditions, because again, here you find a situation where the soldiers are returning from fighting America's wars, African American soldiers. They go to the European theaters, go to Japan, Korea, Vietnam, and come back to the United States, and then find themselves again treated as second-class citizens. And again, this is something that had to be changed. James Sultan is a person that comes to mind here in Orangeburg as being an example of a leader who, after returning from, I think, World War II, really found himself really in the middle of the Orangeburg movement and the effort to get the children into the public school systems of Orangeburg. He's at the forefront, along with Matthew McCollum and others. But around 1960, you also had on the college level an incident, or maybe not, well, an incident, but actually Harvey Gantt of Charleston, South Carolina, was granted through the legal system and through Matthew Perry and Constance Motley Baker. He had achieved the victory of being ordered by the district court, I think, of South Carolina, to be admitted to Clemson. And it was my great opportunity to be able to cover this event exclusively for Jet Magazine. In fact, I represented not only Jet Magazine, but since there would be a limited number of people even on the campus of Clemson that day, I also represented the black press. There were only 3 African Americans on the campus of Clemson University at the morning when Harvey Gantt became the first in modern history of his race to go to Clemson University. And I remember covering it with, again, some awareness that violence could happen at any time. This is happening at a time when James Meredith was injured while involved in an activity, I think in another state, and you have some other violent activities that are taking place. SLED, in order to contain this particular incident, though, has ordered the school closed just for Harvey Gantt's admittance, and all of the faculty has been ordered to leave the campus, all the students and Harvey Gantt, and a sea of reporters really are the only ones, along with SLED and police authorities, as he is being admitted to Clemson University. And SLED's effort to maintain the security of his entrance, they wanted to be able to contain, in view of the fact that there had been violence in previous attempts for an African American to enter a university.
In fact, I think in your book you mentioned the reason there were just the 3 African Americans there that day, you and I think 2 other members of the press, because the university administration told the black employees of the campus not to come to the campus that day.
Yes,
Yeah.
yes. Even the black employees of the dining room were ordered not to report to the campus. I had been a part of a convoy, I think of about 3 cars, and one involving Matthew Perry. Again, Matthew Perry and Constance Motley Baker had assisted Gantt in gaining entrance to the Clemson University. And it had been I think it had been about a 4-year court battle. Actually, Gantt was really achieving a dream that I at one time wanted to do myself. At one time, I wanted to be an architect. In fact, my studio that we are in now and my house next door, and one other house I actually designed myself.
Is that right?
I always wanted to be in photography, though. No matter what else I would have gone into, photography would have been my mainstay. But at one time, I wanted to be an automobile designer, and then one time an architect.
Well, I should say for the record, these homes and this building and your home next door are quite extraordinary pieces of architecture, John.
Especially given this area,
Yeah,
where you don't have contemporary design being very popular.
So you wrote a letter, I think, way back to Strom Thurmond.
Right, requesting that at that time, an African American wanted to study for some degree that was offered by one of the state's segregated colleges. He perhaps might be offered out-of-state tuition. So I wrote to, at that time, Governor Strom Thurmond, and of course I never got a reply. I followed the procedures but never got a reply, so I was kind of ignored altogether. Maybe the funds weren't available or I didn't have any political clout or whatever, but I wasn't able to do that. So the incident at State College in Claflin was what my fate was to be. But on Clemson that morning, again, things went along very quietly. Everything took place, and Gantt became, again, the first of his race to go to Clemson. Incidentally, back in the doing Reconstruction, African Americans had attended the University of South Carolina. But again, in modern times, again, there were no African American students at any of the South Carolina's colleges. And so Gantt was really sort of setting the pace for other things that were to happen, the integration of Clemson University and also the integration of University of South Carolina by African American students as well.
Exactly. Yeah. Let me ask. You had earlier mentioned this rather exceptional meeting with John Kennedy.
Yes.
In 1960.
Yes.
You've just mentioned Harvey Gantt's entrance to Clemson in 63, and so you put me in mind of course, Kennedy's assassination later in 63.
Yes.
And I wonder, I should ask kind of your reaction as you recall it to Kennedy's assassination.
Well, African Americans as well, I think, as the majority of people that I observed in this community, black and white, really were very, very upset. I mean, it was almost as if some natural disaster had taken place, as I remember. I mean, people were crying everywhere. It was a very emotional time. I remember there having a special ceremony at State College, and where people just sat in silence for a few minutes. So he was a very beloved president, And again, during his very short time in office, had demonstrated a willingness to try to change the image of this country and put in place some of the laws we had talked about. And I, by the way, was invited to the inauguration, but was unable to go. I think I would have enjoyed that, but for many reasons I wasn't able to go. But he put into place many of the things, again, that under President Johnson allowed the Civil Rights Act of the mid 1960s to take place. And of course, then we have some of the great changes occurring in race relations in the United States during that period of time. But I think it came about because Kennedy set it into motion.
Yeah. Let me ask about. Let's talk a little about the ways in which Orangeburg did and did not change through these years. And I thought we might start that conversation. In '61, you took an extraordinary photograph of two young African Americans on the step of a white Presbyterian church, where I think they are met by the mayor of Orangeburg. Can you tell that story and what that represents?
Yes. Two friends of mine, Dorothy Van and Emmanuel Hickson, wanted to attend a church in downtown Orangeburg, and I think for the experience. And they were both from other states, I think one being from Virginia and the other one being from, I think, New York or maybe another state. So on this particular morning, I got a tip from someone that that these two students were going to go to the I think St. Paul Church in downtown Orangeburg, and I got in my car and went down there, but I didn't know which church they were at, so I really just circled the area. And finally, I saw the students about to go up the steps. So I jumped out of my car, left the door open, and I ran up the steps. And they had already knocked on the door. The door was closed and services had already begun. And in a minute, a person poked their head out of the door. It turned out to be a Mayor Clyde Fair. At the time, he was a member of that church, but he was the mayor of the city of Orangeburg. And I photographed a picture of the two students being rejected. And I also observed him when he said that this is a segregated church. You can't come in, go worship with your own people. At this particular time in my life, and this picture was also had a very powerful influence on my life as well. At this particular time, seemingly my relationship with the state newspaper and the Times Democrat isn't one where I can actually sell pictures to them. So what happened, I thought this picture to be of great importance, and I drove to Columbia, South Carolina after I developed the pictures. At that time, the Associated Press was located on the second floor of the state newspaper. And I carried the picture into them, and I think I sold it to them for $35. The next day, around the world, the picture was on publications in Germany, or many countries, in many other countries throughout the United States, and many newspapers, including the front page of the I think at that time the Washington Star, which was the most prominent daily in Washington D.C., and I think the New York Times. Then it was in magazines and newspapers later on, but on the day after, again on the front page of papers around the world, showing that this Southern mayor refusing entrance to a church. So it turned out that this helped people to realize that one of the most segregated places in America at any given time was on a Sunday morning anywhere in the South, that African Americans could not attend even a church of their choice. And so we were still living in a very segregated society. And what happened, though, after that picture appeared, about a month, by the way, I had finished college at the time, and I was continuing my studies. I was working on my master's at South Carolina State College, and I had still yet a deferment. And the Selective Service called me in for a interview, and I knew that picture had really provoked them or caught their attention because as I sat down in their office on Doyle Street here in Orangeburg for the interview, one of the I think one of the ladies reached up in this vertical file cabinet, and as she reached up to pull the manila folder containing my name, and it opened accidentally, the newspaper clipping then kind of floated like a feather falling to the floor. So, and that was my picture that they had clipped from one of the newspapers. So I knew that it was probably associated with what they later did in telling me that that I had 30 days to clean up my affair, that they were going to draft me. So I didn't want to be in the Army. I joined the Air Force, but I had to close my studio, just kind of leave everything as it was, and I felt, again, this was another way that they, you might say, finally got me, because they had, again, warned my, and this is the system, you might say, and some of the, I'm talking about a general attitude, but here's one of the persons that's fanning the fires, here's one of the ones that's publicizing these things that happen, here's this person that's helping to wreck our way of life, was in the mind of many people, including the people that made up the Selective Service Board.
So you joined the Air Force?
So I joined the Air Force, yes.
You were in the Air Force for?
I was in the Air Force a very short while. While in the Air Force, I was injured doing my training, and did not, well, I spent about a month and a half in a hospital, and then returned to return to Orangeburg, and then I had sold my studio before leaving, so I had to kind of reestablish my business and all over again and get reestablished.
Remarkable.
I was going to be training other photographers. I had a very good situation when I joined the Air Force. I was going to be training other photographers in Florida, but I had to finish my my training in San Antonio, Texas. But it was not to be, and so I was glad to get in, but I was also glad to get out.
Yes, and lucky for the historical record that you came back and kept photographing.
Yes.
Let me ask about a few more things, and let's spend the last chunk of our time here together talking about '68. But
Okay.
along the way, you will photograph student protests on the steps of the state capitol in Columbia in '62.
Yes.
Again, now you made a very good point a few moments ago, and one I want to acknowledge that this is a story more of continuity than
Yes.
of episodic outbreaks.
Correct.
But we do tend, you're right, we do
Yes.
tend
Yes.
to focus on moments rather than
Yes.
than the continuum. But
Yes.
these landmarks in the history here in South
Yes.
Carolina, the student protests in state capitol '62, the desegregation of University of South Carolina in '63, very interesting challenge to racial segregation in the waiting rooms in Orangeburg, at a local hospital here in Orangeburg in '63 with Miss Blackwell, Rackley Blackwell, and you're even approached by a white Citizens Council member, you think, with an interesting offer along
Yes.
that span. And
Yes.
if you would,
Yes.
let's talk about that, and then we'll talk about '68.
Yes, I don't remember the exact year, but I remember probably 2 times in my career being approached by persons associated with the Citizen Council. And again, since the employment situation was almost entirely in the hands of influential white citizens, a black person's fate was often determined by them. And if you were known to be associated with the protests that were going on, you might be fired, or something else might happen to you, or a loan called in, all kinds of things to disrupt your life. And so I took a picture of a meeting of concerned citizens at Trinity Church, and it was a picture of showing their faces, because I took it from the standpoint of the podium back on the there must have been someone in the black community who told someone in the Citizens Council that I had such a picture, or it was known that when there was a meeting, Cecil Williams probably had those pictures, one or the other. So this person that I identified even up to today as Jack approached me and offered me he just came up with all kind of offers to see if I would sell those pictures to him, and of course I never did. I thought that this was an attempted bribe, and I went back to Reverend Matthew McCollum, and I told him that this is what had happened, and but I had refused, and that picture would never get to them. But mainly what they wanted to do was to take my picture and then see what faces they could identify, what members of the community could be identified, that they would be able to put some kind of pressure. And mainly they were interested in, maybe even from the leadership standpoint, who were the ones that would. Often in the paper you would have a report from the papers that saying that, well, hey, our black citizens of Orangeburg, it's not them that's doing this, it's these outside agitators or communist infiltrators that wanted that would not let situations lie as they were. Although there may have been some of that, still yet again there was no communist infiltrators when this whole thing started, and it was an African American a movement that black citizens started.
Let's tell me about as the context for the Orangeburg massacre in '68 at the bowling alley,
Mm-hmm.
or in relation to the desegregation, the attempt to desegregate the bowling alley. How much did Orangeburg change after '64 and '65 with the Civil Rights Act and the Voting Rights Act? How much did the community change?
During the period of say '62 to '68, many things you had a lot of tokenism. You had a lot of blacks being hired various places. You had most places after 1963, 64, and 65, and the Voting Rights Acts and the other civil rights legislation taking place. You had a lot of them changes taking place, and they were felt here in South Carolina, and they were very much appreciated, and the citizenry, they were enjoying the benefits of those changes. But there were some pockets of resistance. Some places, for example, the churches still were largely segregated. And then also you had some places like bowling alleys and restaurants that in South Carolina had still not welcomed African Americans for them to go into or to shop or whatever. And one here in Orangeburg was the All-Star Bowling Alley. Any student leaving State College or Claflin, or any citizen walking uptown from the area of the campus and going up into the city of Orangeburg, if you were on Russell Street, you would pass by a strip mall on the right-hand side, and out front there was a sign that hung identifying this as the All-Star Bowling Alley, but then there was a small sign that said white only. So if you were walking uptown to spend your money to purchase something, you would pass by that sign every day, or if you were riding by, you would see it. It was large enough. It's about maybe a 7-inch by 3-inch sign that said white only. And so this is one of the facilities that did not allow African Americans. The students, some students at State College who had been driving to Columbia to bowl and going other places because they were not welcome there, decided that they would not take this anymore, and they decided to try to go to the bowling alley, and they were arrested. And then hearing about the arrest, there were others from the campus that also joined. I get involved on about February the 6th, wherein I hear that there's a commotion going on at the bowling alley, and that the students from State and Claflin, and being the yearbook photographer for State and Claflin, wherever the students were, I would catch all of their athletic activities, all of their student activities, all the Lyceum programs, and so here they were involved in a protest, so that's where I was. And what happened, the students and perhaps 250 or 300 students are in the area of the strip mall, and you have approximately 50 or 75 highway patrolmen, city police, and others that are there, and they're trying to tell the students to leave the area, go back to your campus or you will be arrested. And just as all that was going on, a student pressed against a glass in one of the vacant stores in the mall. And everyone's, of course, in a very packed, tight situation, and the least movement caused the student to break this window. And as he broke the window, everybody heard the commotion, and police authorities started raising their clubs as if somebody had maybe intentionally done this. and they began trying to hit people. And so everyone started running away, including myself. I had at that time a twin lens camera, and I had it around my neck, and of course I started running too. In fact, I even left my car, and because my car was parked out on Russell Street, but I left the area and I turned left towards the campus because that's where the greater number of students were headed. And just as I turned by a former furniture store known as Sutcliffe's Furniture Store, I looked back and I saw a female student fall to the ground. And then I saw 2 city policemen start beating on her head with clubs just because of the fact that she had fallen, not because she had done anything, and because she was running. So that shows you the cruelty and the brutality that police authorities were using. Say this was 3 days before the what turned out to be the Orangeburg massacre. On the night of the Orangeburg massacre, I had returned from Columbia, South Carolina, and of course I had been covering all the activities ongoing. And I came to State College from the area again on College Avenue, and right in front of Claflin. I could not get any further because there were police authorities blocking there. And I tried to circumvent where that blockage was, and I went to another area, but I couldn't get in there either. Then I had a couple of little other areas that I knew that was on the campus itself from some other streets to get in, but I could not get in. So I found no way to be able to get onto the campus of State College on that particular evening. Later I would find out that my being unable to get there probably saved my life, because during the night, during a time after the students had built a bonfire, 9 highway patrolmen started creeping up onto the campus of State College, and they started firing their shotguns into a crowd of about 250 students. And ultimately they, after I think about 9 or 10 seconds of firing, you have the 3 students who were later found to be killed. Then you had about 27 injured, and you have perhaps many, many more, some of whom have never come forward, that also receive very minor injuries. And almost all of the injuries are injuries from the back. Jack Bass has a great book out called The Orangeburg Massacre, which tells the story in detail, and he and Jack Anderson did a very good reportage on that. My book called Orangeburg 1968 also has the visual coverage on the pictures from that particular date. But the morning after the massacre, I got in my car, drove to the State College campus, and there was an eerie atmosphere surrounding the area where the students were the night before and where the killings had taken place. It was an overcast morning. It was very cold. I had on my overcoat, and this is about 6:30, 7 o'clock in the morning, and I noticed that the maintenance truck from the campus had arrived, and they were picking up all of the debris to clean up the area. So I looked down and I saw shotgun shells and other debris spread all over the area where the students had been killed. And I started picking those shells up and putting them in my pockets. And then the maintenance truck was picking up other things at the same time. Later, after my picture appears in, I think Time and Newsweek and in newspapers all over the United States, I should mention that I took a picture of the shells of a student. I posed a picture of a student holding the shells, and I think I had about 7 or 8 or 9 shells. And later, after this picture appeared in many publications, national publications around the United States, the Federal Bureau of Investigation confiscated the shells from me, and they later were used as a trial is developed to try the highway patrolman. And they led the shells that I picked up to coming from 9 highway patrolmen who had actually fired on and killed the students. As it turned out, in a trial in Florence, South Carolina, all 90 highway patrolmen were found not guilty. And to bring that up to today, I think that only a couple of years the FBI considered maybe reinvestigating and reopening this particular case, but they failed to do so as well. I was also offered a job to join the FBI at that time. At this time, 1968, there were very few African Americans, and the FBI agent who got the shells from me informed me that J. Edgar Hoover himself had asked him to ask me if I wanted to be an FBI agent. And of course, I refused that offer because I didn't know whether it was a genuine effort or whether they wanted really just to make me an informant out of me, which I refused. In more recent times, we've heard a case where some photographers were approached in the same way I was. Whenever I received a notice of that type, I usually would inform the local officers that, hey, this is taking place, as I did with that particular. Again, I told Reverend Matthew McCollum and James Sultan that I had been approached by the FBI, and also Oscar Butler, who was also seemingly of interest to them because, again, he was the student, the university's student, over the student organizations on the campus, and they felt that they were seeking information on him as well. And the FBI, again, although investigating this particular case, in my opinion, failed to do the job that they should have done, because there was no doubt who killed the students. The fact is that there were no guns found to belong to any students, and although a officer had been injured by part of a railing from a house next door during the time there were students there, still yet there was no massive effort and anything to justify the highway patrolman really firing upon the students. And this incident, came to be known as the Orangeburg massacre because that's exactly what it was. They were defenseless. They didn't have any weapons, and till today, it's also, unfortunately, one of the stories about things happening in this area that many publications and people really don't know about. It hadn't been reported in many publications other than my own. I think there are two books about it, or mine and the one by Jack Bass, and it's nowhere nearly as well known as the Kent State students massacre, where they were protesting also at the time, again, for involvement of the United States in I think the Vietnam War, where students were also fired upon by highway patrolmen and also National Guardsmen.
I know that Justice Finney and, well, not then Justice Finney, but he was then the head of the Human Relations Committee, and
yes.
Another member both resigned in '69 after,
yes.
out of their frustration over the lack of prosecutorial effort in the Orangeburg massacre.
Yes. Yeah. Yes.
Yeah. John, let's pause here for a moment.
We're on again.
We're back after a short break, and we're going to finish today, very appropriately, I think, with a look at some of your work, Mr. Williams, and just some reflections as you have several volumes with you that you've published.
These are some pictures of that I think that I probably have probably more inside details than I think of any other civil rights publication I know. Again, pictures coming from the inside of the movement, but here are students getting out of jail. These are the photographs that often you don't see into other publications because, again, you see the major event or incident, but again, these are the kind of behind the scenes. Money was raised to bail the students out, and here you see them, getting out of jail, and some of the students have a jubilant look because although they sacrifice themselves to go to jail, they're also happy to get out because jail conditions were very terrible at this time.
Absolutely. Yes.
One of the largest demonstrations in civil rights history, the largest number of arrests occurred at what is called the Pink Palace. Is it okay to turn to that?
Okay.
Turn to Pink Palace. Now, I was jailed here at the city police. This is where I went to jail twice. And of course, usually the NAACP would bail me out and I was never even fully booked. I would be jailed. I would be bailed out first because they wanted me to continue taking the photographs. But here are students in what is called the stockade of the Pink Palace. And one of the photographs associated with this was on the front page of the New York Times and around the world, where at one time the largest number of demonstrators ever arrested in a mass civil rights protest was this particular one. 388, I think, were arrested. So many were arrested that it overfilled even this facility, and even penitentiary buses were called in from Columbia to haul the students back to the penitentiary. So again, this is about, I'm not sure whether this is
1960.
1960, correct? Yes.
Yeah, that was the first real large
Mm-hmm.
direct action protest
Mm-hmm.
after Greensboro.
Yes.
Okay.
And I think what happened was, if I remember, and what that photo shows is how demonstrators were just sort of funneled into a
Yes.
fenced area behind the jail.
Yes.
Yeah.
And it was a cold February morning. I remember that, and the students were wet. Their water hoses were called in, and they were wet and placed in these facilities. The other unique thing about America's civil rights movement, especially the events happening in the South, in the Deep South, and in South Carolina, and among the students that I have associated with, was the fact that students were well dressed. Often, when they participated in a movement, the men would have on a shirt and tie and a coat, and the young ladies were looking like they were going to church. So they were well dressed and they were well orderly. And they were well behaved even before Martin Luther King's call for passive resistance. So I think this is to underscore the fact that they wanted to peacefully achieve these objectives of equality and justice and freedom for all.
Mm-hmm.
Is there any particular?
No, really, some other things that really come to mind. Oh, that's a beautiful.
This is a photograph that I have in my office. This is, I think, about 1963, downtown Orangeburg, and here you have 3,000 people, including my own mother, who are part of a demonstration, and they have really come here to pray for peace and tranquility, and also for opportunities, and also asking, I think one of the ministers who prayed asked that city authorities also employ black youth and employ black citizens. You have this time where you have almost no black city police, no blacks in the city council, no blacks in the county government, nothing. So it's still, even in 1963, a very segregated area that we live in. I tried to, with Out of the Box in Dixie, produce a top quality book that would be representative of the dignity of the movement that occurred, and the fact that here is my effort to bring to light some of the unsung heroes who started and kept the civil rights movement objectives ongoing. There is almost no picture of the people that most people associate with the civil rights movement: Martin Luther King, Rosa Parks, Jesse Jackson, in my book. Here are unknown, unsung heroes who are really making the movement happen and moving along, and at the grassroots level of the movement. And it starts with the beginning of the civil rights movement in Clarendon County, and it goes through really the 2000, the year 2000, I think 8 or 9, with my coverage of events that largely fall into the pursuit of African Americans trying to achieve their full citizenship in America. And so this is my contribution, hopefully, to that effort.
Yeah. Let me note, too, for the record, that there are 2 other books that you've published. We've mentioned one already, Freedom and Justice, and another. And if you could
And the Orangeburg massacre again puts the faces to the movement, and also it has the stories and interviews of the persons injured. You have here stories of the persons who were actually shot, and the words of how it was when they realized that they were bleeding, and very graphic illustrations, and again from the yearbook, which I was a yearbook photographer at the time. I tried to pull their picture of, what were they involved in at the time that this happened, and to add some background to what went on. This is John Stroman, who was they tried to make a scapegoat of him, and at one time tried to charge him with disobedience and riot charges. The only person jailed relative to the Orangeburg massacre was Cleveland Sellers. Sellers was really jailed not for the events that happened in 1968. He was actually jailed for the incident that happened that I described earlier on February the 6th, where the police authorities are called into the bowling alley area, because he was not even at the actual site when it first went on. He was, I think, walking by. Sellers today has moved from really from that era to really today being the president of Voorhees College,
Mr. Williams, let me thank you so much
Mm-hmm.
for being so generous with your time and
Sure.
your work and all
Mm-hmm.
these just extraordinary
Mm-hmm.
Perspectives.
Thank you.
It's been
I'm
a
very glad to be a
privilege.
part of this.
Thank you for
How's
sitting
it?
on
You are the one that is. Oh, I'm sorry. We're still on camera.
We'll just cut for one. We can stop there.
Okay.
This has been
Who would you like for me to do a video on next? What are your thoughts about this video? Please share them in the comments. Please be honest when answering these questions. Share this video with anyone you deem necessary. And don't forget to like and subscribe to the channel.